Deliver Me by Farrah Rochon. As always, you can tell me if I'm saying these names incorrectly in the comments. I feel like I should have read something more modern of hers. She still writes. This is an older book of hers. It's an ebook that I most likely bought on a Stuff Your Kindle day or through some other version of that. And so I read it. It was something I could easily get my hands on. But it felt like a young writer, if I can be honest. It felt like someone who hadn't honed the skill of showing the story rather than telling. And what I mean by that is it didn't necessarily feel like I was watching people have an emotional journey. I was from the outside and suddenly shit happened. I also didn't love the extra points of view in this book. Let me explain. You've got Monica and Eli, FMC, MMC. Monica is from St. Louis. She's an ER doc, and she moves to New Orleans where she meets Eli, who is an OBGYN, and they work at the same hospital. They do not get along in their first meeting. She gets the wrong scrubs. He calls her a nurse. He's kind of rude. Not the best of situations, but there's this great chemistry between them. They're very attracted. They get on the same committee and a romance ensues. That's who I want to hear from. I want to hear from Monica and I want to hear from Eli. There's this totally separate couple, patients of mainly Eli's, that we get a perspective of. And I was waiting for them to play a bigger part in maybe the ending, in the resolution, but they didn't. And so I didn't care about that other couple. Maybe they deserve their own book. Maybe it felt like wasted space to me. Also, the resolution at the end, it felt quick. Monica's mad at Eli. There's a misunderstanding and a third act breakup, which is not my favorite. And this one was really not my favorite because it just felt really like juvenile the way it was all handled. But basically they meet up at this, big gala that they're on the committee for that they plan. And she just throws her arms around him and goes, "I'm sorry, I missed you." You didn't talk about anything. You didn't figure anything out together. When it comes to the spice, well, there is spice and they expound, oh my goodness. Eli's like, oh God, what was the quote? It was a great quote. "I now know the difference between having sex and making love." You expound poetically after the fact, but I don't get to see it, and therefore I don't know if I believe you. From the satisfied look on her face as she stared languidly at him from across the room, Eli could only conclude Monica had enjoyed last night's experimenting as much as he had. Okay, what experimenting? Experimenting as in you learned each other's bodies, or experimenting in, stuff got kinky, stuff got crazy. It didn't resonate with me. And it's sad because there were moments when I really enjoyed this family. I really enjoyed this couple. I liked the idea of them. But in terms of the execution of this book, it didn't land. So she's kept writing for years since this book. If there is a book of hers that you feel shows off how she's matured as a writer, I would love to hear what it is, because I don't want to give up on her. Don't come at me. I listened to Leather and Lark by Brynne Weaver. It's different. If you were obsessed with Butcher and Blackbird like I was, the story continues, but this just didn't hit in the same way for me. And it might be because it's a different type of story. Butcher and Blackbird was a romantic comedy tied up in serial killers. They liked each other. They were kind of rivals, but not really. Their banter was great. It was very lighthearted from the beginning. Yeah, there were serial killers, but their relationship, the two of them, was lighthearted and lovely and fun. And Leather and Lark is not that. Lachlan and Lark do not get along. They have a kind of kidnappy history and they butt heads, but there's this marriage of convenience situation where Lark basically asks Lachlan to marry him to protect everyone in their lives, and they get married and try to pretend that it's real. It's heavy. Lark really holds a grudge, and Lachlan is trying his best to just prove himself over and over and over again. So in terms of the will they won't they, it isn't as lighthearted. It doesn't, titillate. It's not like bubbles in your stomach of, oh my goodness, maybe they'll get together. Or did he say he likes her when he's drugged out at the serial killer's house? It's not the same thing as Butcher and Blackbird. This is a much heavier book in terms of their relationship, in terms of their situation. It wasn't as fun. There are great moments, and it's really sweet. And we watch Lachlan earn Lark's trust back and them coming together as a couple, and they do a lot more domestic things, which I enjoy because they're already married, but it didn't tickle my fancy in the same way. Also, you can't put pegging on your trigger warnings and then not deliver until the fucking bonus chapter. You just can't. You can't do that to me. I waited the whole book for it, and it was great. It was absolutely great in the bonus chapter. I'm not mad that I read it. I'm giving it 4 stars because I think that she does some really clever things in her writing. I think her world is better. I honestly do wonder if reading this as a physical book would have been better for me, because I could have made it less mean in my head. And that's the thing about audiobook performances or performances in general. When it's read out loud, like, that's it. That's the interpretation that the actor, that the director, that team has created, and you can't really change it. When you're reading something on the page, if you don't want it to sound as mean, if you want it to be a little more bantery, that's fine. Oh, something else I didn't like. I didn't like the way she laughed. She laughed so much and I didn't like it at all. I'm so sorry. It just wasn't for me. It really annoyed me. It really, really annoyed me. Okay, that's it. So Leather and Lark, I'm going to say, like, I don't regret reading it because I want to get to the 3rd one. Also, it's beautiful. Also, like, it's a very interesting story. Who knew that Lark was also a serial killer? That was probably my favorite part, is Lark is also a serial killer. But I might give this an actual read and see how it feels that way. My reading was redeemed by Trial of the Sun Queen. I devoured this book. I devoured this in 2 days. Absolutely loved it. This book I bought just because I liked the cover, and then I found out that Nisha J. Tuli's going to be at Steamylit, and then I found out that Nisha J. Tuli was going to be at the last chapter, and so I bought the other 2 books in the series. There are 3 so far. 4th's coming out in November. Final one's coming out in November. And then I met her and it was amazing. I loved this book. This book is fantasy. It is brown people in fantasy. They're not white. This is not Eurocentric. And you know what, y'all? It's fucking fantasy. It can be whatever the hell the author wants. So I loved it. There are fae, there are powers, there are trials, there is engagements, there's arranged marriages, there is death. There's like life and death decisions that have to be made. There are multiple point of views. There's a shadow daddy if you're into that sort of a thing. And I ate this shit up. I can't even tell you. It is the first time in a very long time that I have stayed up like 2-3 hours past my bedtime because I had to finish the book. Something that I did for the first time in my physical annotations, and I will credit Dark Midnight Designs with that, is I had a specific plot color of my tabs. With fantasy, and honestly for me in general, there are plot moments or key things that happen that I should really know and note. So the names of certain powers, the names of the kings, the situations, I noted that in that color at the top. And then if something was confusing where I felt like I'd heard it before, I was able to go back and reference really, really quickly. And that helped me a lot in this world building, and I'm keeping it going forward. So this is not just in my fantasy. This isn't everything going forward. It's where I'm going to keep plot points that are really important, not necessarily things that I liked or didn't like, just information that I need to be able to access quickly. You have Lore, who is in a prison. She's been there since she was a child, and she's kind of a snarky prisoner, and she gets in trouble a lot, and she's thrown into their version of solitary confinement that normally drives people insane, and she is rescued by a fae with wings. His name is Gabriel. Here he has some important roles to play in future books, and she's brought to this completely different kingdom where she is the only human in a bunch of fae competing to be the new wife of their king. I loved it. I like ate that shit up. It is so unfair her situation. There are literally life and death challenges that people are doing in gowns. So it's not, you know, fight to the death. It's, do you know the history of the kingdom? If not, we're going to throw you into a pit of mermaids who are going to kill you. What? Who comes up with this? Nisha J. Tuli came up with it, and it was fucking brilliant. And there is a new point of view. There are 2 points of view. There's Laura, and then there's Nadir. And because it's Nadir, you kind of know some shit's gonna go down at the end of the book, and it does. I kind of knew it was coming. I could see where it was building, and I didn't mind it. It was, again, one of those self-fulfilling prophecies where I went, yeah, I got it. I got the clue. I'm sure that the clues were very, very obvious because I am not good at discerning these things, but I loved it. I know that the 3rd book ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, and I don't know if I can take the emotional wreckage that I saw from other humans at this book signing, so I might save them until October or November when the 4th book comes out and the series concludes, because the emotional agony people were sharing, I don't know if I can handle that right now, but I loved this book. Sometimes you just need a spicy novella to get you through the day. Or the pandemic. This is 2 Scoops of Hellfire by Kimberly Lemming. I know, you're probably sick of me talking about her. Too fucking bad. I love her. This is a novella that she wrote during the pandemic. It is not part of her Mead's Mishap series. It is completely separate. And it was exactly what I needed. A moose-bouche of her style with a contemporary twist. Basically, Daisy is baking and accidentally summons a demon from hell because she got butter everywhere and put the runes of this demon in the butter. And so he shows up to her absolute chaos of a baking disaster. Things are on fire. Things are cooked that they should not be cooked. Things are not cooking that should be cooking. And it is hysterical. He immediately is like, she's high. She's like, what? I don't understand this. And then they bone. And that's it. Like, that's the point. She accidentally summons a demon and then they bone. Enough. Daisy goes, this is what happens when you start a new hobby in the pandemic. And you know what? We all did it. We all started something stupid in the pandemic. I don't know what your pandemic hobby was. I'm not even going to disclose mine. It's embarrassing. But I will say I'm a better person for having suffered through it. I really loved it. If you're looking for a spicy novella, that also is lighthearted. I find that a lot of novellas that I'm looking for have like a lot of angst to them. A lot of romantic novellas have this like deep angst. And you're not going to get that. If you just want to feel good, if you just want to watch some people bone, read this. 2 Scoops of Hellfire. It felt exactly like what I would have needed in 2021 and 2022 because of the feelings I was having in 2021 and 2022. And to go back to this and feel like, oh, this would have been there for me, or this kind of soothes the soul of me, the person who still went through those things in 2021 and 2022. So yeah, go read it. 2 Scoops of Hellfire by Kimberly Lemming. The phrase "don't judge a book by its cover" was probably made for me in this moment because I dislike this cover. I find that their faces are really aggressive. It gives me kind of an ick, even though I love pink. But I read it because it's on the list for Steamy Lit, and I'm glad that I did. It is a quintessential marriage of convenience romance. You have Gemma and Tansy. Tansy has been lying to her family about having a fake girlfriend for months, like 6 months now, and she accidentally said her name was Gemma because she was looking at a picture of Gemma, who is a known romance cover model, and Tansy owns a bookstore. And then when she runs into the real Gemma at a wedding, oh, this is your girlfriend, and Gemma just plays into it because she's just inherited her grandfather's media company with the caveat that she has to be married. She's like, yep, absolutely. We've been dating for 6 months and I just asked her to marry me. Done. Fiancé in the bag. It is so fucking cute. Gemma is this party girl, wild child. Love her energy. She lives in like the midst of the chaos of this horrible family, like truly wretched human beings. And Tansy is this quiet kind of mousy, I wear cardigans to weddings bookstore owner who has been burned by Tansy's cousin. Tansy's cousin did her wrong. He's a jackass and could probably go to jail, should probably go to jail. That's another story. So Tansy and Gemma engage in this fake relationship. They're planning a wedding, and then the chemistry between them is super, super palpable. So they decide to actually start dating each other as they're in the midst of this engagement and soon to be wedding. And the more that they get to know each other and the more that they start to date each other, the more that they fall for each other and realize that the other person, while never necessarily their type, might be the exact thing that they need. And this is an example of a third act breakup where I actually understood why it happened. I should just like put spoiler, spoiler, spoiler all the time. There are some moments when a third act breakup is really necessary, and it wasn't them that caused the third act breakup. There was family drama that caused it. It wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't something that made me angry. It was something that felt really logical and understandable at the time. And the way that both of them separately decided to get through it and just kind of came together felt almost gifts of the Magi-ish, but romance. In terms of the spice, it was pretty light for me. There are a few moments of spice, but they're not very long, and I don't feel like they go into the greatest of detail. I think that for me, that was one of the things that were missing, because they talked a lot of attraction, they talked a lot of excitement, and I wanted to see that excitement play out in the bedroom, especially with some of that banter. Like, you know that it's going to be good. And I wanted to watch that. Both Gemma and Tansy also identify as not a lesbian. They're both people who have dated men and women. I think that goes a long way to eliminating some of the bisexuality blindness or frustration, or like, ooh, you're not really bi. I hate that. No, the fact that they get together and they both express that in their history, I think is really important, because if you look at the couple, if you look at these two women, you might assume something about their sexuality that's not true. And that reminds us that we can't assume we know everything about a person's sexuality just because of how a relationship that they're in might present. That's not fair, that's not kind, and it erases their identity. So the fact that we get to see these two together and they're both very clear on what their sexuality and their sexual preference and their sexual history is made me feel like they were seen as they were, or I saw them as they were, and I didn't feel like, oh, well, just because you dated guys, I guess you're a lesbian now. Nope, you're still exactly who you were. Same sexual preferences. This is just the person that you've fallen in love with and chosen to be with. So, the Fiancée farce. I honestly don't know where I saw Dark City Omega on here on the social medias being recommended to me, but whoever it was, thank you. Thank you. I love paranormal. This is fantasy paranormal, so it's actually in a different world, but it's werewolves, and it's omegaverse, and it's so fucking fun. Just such a fun read. Also, this is an author of color. The FMC is a person of color. I loved so much about this book. You have Echo and Adam, Omega Berserker. In this Omegaverse fantasy world, there are 4 different categories. There is beta, which kind of everyone is, and then you either stay a beta or evolve into an alpha, which you usually get a lot more power, you're a little bit bigger, into a berserker, which is like the biggest of the big and usually rules a city or city-state, some sort of area. And then you have omegas, and omegas have powers, but they submit to berserkers or alphas, like really berserkers, but also alphas. And Echo has been a beta her whole life and then suddenly transitions into an omega, and she's kicked out of her home because betas can't have omegas. Berserkers will want them, alphas will want them. She is hunted down, and she is escaping into this terrible, horrible dystopian area of the island land that she is on. It is a really interesting story. Adam finds her, he bite marks her, which goes so wrong, just so wrong. And it's because he was told he'd find his omega in the woods with red hair, and she has red hair. They get together, and it's so bad. He fucks up so horribly, and she is so gun shy, and she's been burned just by the world and by her own sense of self. Literally, she sees the berserker, she sees Adam, and she thinks to herself, I'd rather die than be bound to him, and she stabs herself in the thigh. It's oof. And then there's this other aspect of it where because she's an omega, she gets powers. And what are her powers, and will she learn to control them, or will they stay dormant, and when she becomes Adams, all these political intrigues, and there's this bigger plot of a different city that's kind of trying to take over. It's so fun. There's so much intrigue in this story. There's so much interesting in this world. Adam really is forced to reckon with his role in the world, that his berserkerness has allowed him to live a certain way and perpetuate certain systems that are unfair and unjust. And he's the leader of Dark City. Shouldn't he change it if he has the power? And his eyes are opened in that way. So when it comes to sex, okay, all right, when it comes to the sex, they do have sex. They do. It's not a lot. I feel like it wasn't a lot of sex, but mostly because they're just fighting with each other constantly. They're fighting with each other instead of fucking each other constantly. I will say, this book did a great job of clit stimulation with hands and without hands, and really describing that and saying like how it's done and how he satisfies her. Thank you, Elizabeth Stevens, because that's important too. And it's not always about a reach around. It's about, you know, the motion of the ocean and how that's going to go. And you did a great job of describing that in a way that was believable, in a way that made me go, good job, sir. I want more of it. That's the only thing. I know that there are more books, and all I can say is I want more of them together, especially after they overcome all the hurdles in this book. I want them to move through stuff together. There are some storyline spoilers, and I actually don't want to spoil them for you, but let me just say that I called a twist really early on. Probably with highlighted, starred, glitter bombed in terms of the narrative, and I was supposed to understand that, but I went, oh my gosh, this is totally happening. And then when it happened, I went, oh my god, it totally happened. So that was really fun, and I want to see where it goes next. I believe there's a second book. I don't know if this is a duology or not. I guess I'll have to ask her. I guess I'll just have to ask.